Student Cam contest at cspan.org.
Under the visa waiver program, citizens of 38 countries are allowed to visit the U.S. for up to 90 days without applying for a visa. Yesterday, the House passed a bill that would make people who've recently visited Iraq, Syria, and other war zones ineligible for the program. The Senate Homeland Security Committee held a hearing on the visa waiver program and these proposed reforms, hearing testimony from state and Homeland Security Department officials. This 90-minute hearing was led by Committee Chair Ron Johnson.
I guess I'll gavel this roundtable into order here. I want to thank the witnesses. There may have been a little miscommunication in terms of the timing of this thing. I was told that we really want to start this at 11. We had the vote at 10:45, which is why I think our attendance is not as strong at the start. I think a lot of senators want to come here, want to hear what you have to say. Also appreciate that we were able to set this up as a roundtable. I wanted to have administration officials and people from the outside, sitting together so we can have a good discussion of this. And this will be pretty much a free-flowing discussion, which is also nice. I talked to Senator Peters about that as well. Rather than have it very structured and 7 minutes per senator, when we're on a topic, I'm going to encourage all my colleagues to just jump in if they've got a particular question, so we can, so it's not disjointed. We've obviously got 4 witnesses here. Ms. Kelly.
Barisi.
There you go. I'm really bad at getting pronunciation.
Quite all right. So, quite all right.
Ms. Barisi is the Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Screening Coordination Office in the Office of Policy at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Ms. Barisi can speak to the enhancements DHS is currently considering to strengthen the visa waiver program. We have Mr. John Wagner, who is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner at the Office of Field Operations for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Wagner can speak to operational considerations in the visa waiver program and how CBP officers make determinations at ports of entry. Mr. Wagner can also discuss the benefits of pre-clearance operations. Next witness will be Mr. Justin Ciberel. Ciberel. Okay. I told you I'm really bad. Not even 50%. Mr. Ciberel is the Principal Deputy Coordinator for the Counterterrorism Bureau of Counterterrorism at the U.S. Department of State. Mr. Ciberel can speak to the existing information sharing agreements the U.S. government has with visa waiver program countries and the diplomatic benefits to the visa waiver program. And finally, Mr. Mark Fry is the Senior Director at Steptoe & Johnson and former Director of the visa waiver program at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from 2007 to 2010. As a former Director of the visa waiver program, Mr. Fry can speak to the need to enhance the visa waiver program in a sensible way that will allow us to maintain the benefits of the program while at the same time enable DHS to prevent terrorist travel. Now, we didn't ask people to submit testimony, so I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but Mr. Fry actually did submit testimony. And I'll tell you, Dr. Fry, it was probably the most succinct description of the basic visa waiver program and the advantages of it in terms of enhancing our security. So, not to put you on the spot, and I didn't give you a warning on this, it would be nice if you could go through in a bullet point fashion what testimony you provided and talk about really why the visa waiver program does improve our security and why we should be certainly looking to strengthen it, addressing some of the vulnerabilities, but we don't want to weaken it. We did, by the way, have a hearing on the Syrian refugee situation, and one of the reason we're having this roundtable is because one of the outcomes of that, because we did lay out that there's a pretty strong vetting process, and from my standpoint, I'm a little concerned that with this administration announcing that it wants to increase the number of refugees coming to this country by 21% the first year, about 43% the next, that there might be managerial pressure to start cutting corners on that. And I support a certification process. But in that hearing we heard there are certainly some concerns about some of the vulnerabilities, some of the weaknesses in the visa waiver program. And I want to explore those. If there's holes that need to be plugged, I think we need to plug those holes. But the purpose of this roundtable, I come from a manufacturing background, solved a lot of problems. The first step is laying out reality, acknowledging reality, and then start setting some achievable goals based on that reality. So this is really about laying out that reality, and I think by yammering on here, I've given Dr. Fry enough time to maybe prepare, but I'd really like to start there, and I'll just ask you the question. Can you kind of summarize your testimony and lay out the case for the visa waiver program?
Is that on?
Talk a little bit more.
Is that on? button does not. There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Thanks.
Well, thank you, Chairman Johnson, and for having me here, and senators, and it's a pleasure to be on this distinguished panel. I'll have to say that I cheated in a sense with this testimony, because you may have recognized what I provided was an updated version of what I submitted to this committee in March, when I also testified on the visa waiver program. And so I don't want to make my fellow panelists feel bad that they didn't get a chance to submit testimony, because I recycled what I had.
So it just wasn't that much work.
Exactly.
I appreciate that. I like efficiency.
Exactly. But happy to talk about the VWP and what can be done. And in fact, roundtables like this, the hearing that you held last spring, are all important, because what the VWP probably needs more than anything else is education and awareness. There remains, despite a lot of efforts, a misunderstanding of what the program is and what the program isn't. And there seems to be this perception that because the word waiver is in the title, that somehow security requirements are waived, when in fact that's precisely the opposite. So I'm happy to talk about sort of what I see as the four key security components of the VWP. But before I do so, I'd just like to note that it's entirely fitting and appropriate that roundtables like this, hearings, and the legislation that your committee introduced just the other day are being talked about, because the VWP, like all good security programs, needs to evolve. And it needs to evolve in light of the current threat environment. It's not a static program, nor should it be. And the history of the visa waiver program, certainly since 9/11, the program predates that significantly, but certainly since 9/11, when it really became a security program more so than a travel facilitation program, there's been a history of reforms. Some administratively done, some legislatively done. So this all makes sense, and it's worth doing.
Let me, because we've got a couple of other colleagues that have joined us now, I want this kind of a free-flowing discussion here. So I'll encourage, even while Dr. Fry is talking about this, if you've got a question on a particular subject, bring it up while we're talking about the subject. So it's not disjointed. I'd say the same thing to the witnesses as well. Just kind of raise your hand, and we'll kind of recognize you from there. But again, let's keep this very free-flowing. I think it'd be more effective.
Oh, thank you. So to get into briefly, I think the four main security components of the VWP and why it really is a security enhancing program. The first is individualized screening of visa waiver program travelers, right? So the perception that somehow you have a European passport and you waive it at the gate agent in Paris and you show up at Dulles or JFK or somewhere else is just simply not true. There is a individualized vetting program that goes on via the electronic system for travel authorization, which is overseen by CBP. And that, in fact, was part of the last major legislative reform to the visa waiver program, which was done as part of the implementing the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission Act back in 2007. So we set up the system for ESTA that requires data from individual travelers, and CBP and DHS and others in the U.S. government are able to run that data against various watch lists, law enforcement databases, terrorism databases.
Is that the same with all visas, like the fiancé visa?
Yes, I think, and, sorry, Kelly, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's the same biographic checks that are.
Let me show you my son.
It's the same biographic checks that occur for a visa occur for an ESTA. It's DHS's databases, State Department's consular lookout support system, otherwise we call it CLASS, Interpol's lost and stolen travel documents, so database. So it's law enforcement, CT databases, of course, the terrorism screening database.
Yeah, and if I might, Mr. Chairman, and just excuse me if we're getting the cart way ahead of the horse. So, does it include recent travel? Does that individual screening include recent travel, and how far back on that travel does it include? For months or years or days?
Do you want to talk about the travel history?
What I'm trying to flesh out is the individual screening. How thorough is that individual screening, and do we need to take a look at things we need to do?
Sure, and I think what I will say, and I think John is probably the best person to handle this, but is that there's some screening that goes on that through ESTA that's specific to the visa waiver program, and as Kellyanne said, is identical to the vetting that goes on for visas. That complements another set of screening protocols, I guess is the best way to put it, that CBP does on all travelers to the United States, whether they're visa waiver or visa, and that does take more into account travel history. And so the visa waiver program fits into this larger border security framework that CBP has.
And how far back does that travel history go?
Well, if it's travel to the United States, it's since we've been
No,
collecting
I'm speaking more about traveling to Iran or Iraq or Syria by the folks in the EU.
We would not routinely have access to that kind of information.
If there's not a nexus to the United States, we wouldn't have that, but that is regardless of a visa or an ESTA. Would you mind if I could be so?
Some information sharing agreements we do have with a few partners that gives us access to travel itineraries that don't include the United States. There's some information we get through the intelligence community or law enforcement networks, but it's not, we don't have visibility on the entire world and all the movements of people moving around.
Okay. Well,
If it, I'm sorry, if it would help, I mean, as Mark was just starting out saying, a starting place is educating about what it is, and I know he's getting to it. I mean, if we could talk about exactly what the program is, what it requires, get through all those, I personally think we'd have, I think it might help inform the questions, right? I just.
Right, that's what I was trying to do, so.
Thank you. Thank you so
If there's a
much.
better way, do you want to?
You're welcome to.
No. I'm very comfortable with Mark,
Okay.
as well as myself. Anybody on
So you're
the
saying,
panel
so
can
Senators,
talk about
hold your
it.
questions till at least
I'm
Mark
so
kind of goes
sorry, is
through.
that-
No, this is what I want. I want this a pretty relaxed atmosphere here, so, but why don't you kind of go through it, but as quickly as possible.
Sure, yes,
No,
okay.
don't go into such great detail because there'll be a lot of drilling down.
Of course, yeah. Thank you, Senator. So we talked about ESTA a bit, which is this individualized and recurrent screening of VWP travelers. So just because you have an ESTA today doesn't necessarily mean you'd have one tomorrow if derogatory information comes up. The second piece is that of the visa waiver program itself is information sharing specific to the VWP. Countries that participate in the program are required to share information with the United States effectively on citizens or passengers who may be a security risk, known and suspected terrorists, or are serious criminals. And related to that as well is a requirement to share lost and stolen passport data with Interpol, which CBP uses both in the ESTA screening process and in its larger screening for all flights coming into the United States. So there's an information sharing piece. So, and those two pieces work together, ESTA and the information sharing, because the information that we get from our partners in the VWP feeds into ESTA to make the entire database, the U.S. databases, better and more effective.
Okay, now let me I'll violate my own rule because I think what Senator Test was talking about, including that information sharing, would that have travel from, let's say, France into Iraq or Syria? Would we, is it robust enough to?
Exactly the point.
Robust enough to figure that out?
Well, as I said, the ESTA system, as Kellyanne said, hits against certain databases and is informed by derogatory information on individuals provided by our partners. And so, for example, if there's travel, I believe that if there's travel history provided that gives rise to a concern from a partner, and that raises to a level where the person is potentially a known and suspected terrorist, then that individual's name will be given to us, and then the ESTA vetting will catch that. As a general rule, the ESTA vetting itself, as John said, doesn't hit travel without a U.S. nexus.
It relies on the quality of information of the visa waiver country, right? It relies on the reliability of that. It's not all uniform. It's not all reliable. It's probably, I would argue it's better than not having the information sharing, okay? Mr. Wagner.
Just that it's going to be contingent on does that country collect the information, how long do they store it for, and then on their own domestic laws and privacy laws, are they even allowed to share it with us? And if it's not, say, a identified national security reason, can they just give us bulk information or bulk data for us then to determine whether there's some national security implications?
But there are standards under the program that require a certain threshold of information that is available that can be shared, correct?
Yes.
And maybe we can get into that in greater detail, but let's again go through
Okay,
some of
That's some of
Before
the-
you do that, if I just ask, so just the example of the folks in the Paris attack who were all EU citizens, are you comfortable knowing what you know of the folks who were engaged in that attack? Would they have been stopped at the border of the United States based on what we have right now, each of those individuals? Have we looked at that to see whether or not the system would have prevented that?
Yes, and some of them would have been prevented from traveling here to begin with.
Some, not all.
Some. I mean, prefer to discuss more of the details in a classified setting, but I mean, it's been reported some of them were identified to governments as being national security risks already.
And that would have been in the database?
There's information that we would have received from their travel details that we're confident we would have identified had they booked travel to the United States. So.
But I think we should also point out that without the visa waiver program, they would have shown up in an embassy, and would have embassy personnel had information on these individuals better or worse than what's available through the visa waiver program in automatic databases?
Well, the embassies can have the same information we'll have access to. I mean, it's the same databases we check. It's the same basic biographical information we collect, whether it's on any type of visa application or an ESTA application for a visa waiver traveler. It's your basic biographical information and your basic, points of contact and a few other data fields. So we run it against the same types of derogatory databases, the same U.S. government holdings and how it's passed back and forth. We come to the same results.
But without a visa waiver program and the information sharing, intelligence sharing requirements of the visa waiver program, would there, I'm just trying to compare. If you didn't have a visa waiver program, would we not have access to information of some of this law enforcement, information that's specific to those countries, those visa waiver countries? I mean,
right. The visa waiver gives us the structured format and the formalities to exchange that type of information and provides a platform to share it.
If that information exists.
Correct.
Right. Well, right. That's always the case. If, as a result of the, I think it is. Maybe I'm not talking loud enough. As a result of the information sharing arrangements are required for the VWP, they have shared over 9,000 known or suspected terrorists with us that we are now using in our vetting. As a result, we wouldn't have that if it wasn't for the VWP program. So, that is an excellent security value of the program that wouldn't exist in countries just issuing visas.
That under the HSPD 6 agreement, in which the framework for sharing of this data, known and suspected terrorist identity data, we use that as a requirement in the program, and therefore being a member of the program requires that you pass that information to us. So in that regard, if you didn't have the visa waiver program, you might not have the incentive and disincentive to not providing that information. So it actually helps us in that structured framework to push governments to share that information with us, because non-performance could be problematic for that country as to remaining a member of the program.
There are several bills that have been dropped in to deal with the visa waiver program. One of them is to require that if a person from Europe, for example, has been traveled to Syria, that information would be automatically transferred. Let me ask it from the opposite side. If we require that of them, they're going to require that of us, which I don't have any problem with. The question is do we have that information, and two, can we legally share it with them?
We're taking steps to add, to enhance ESTA even further. That was part of an announcement from the White House on November 30th. And we're already in the process of making those additional changes.
Okay, but that wasn't my question. My question is that if we have a visa waiver person that's an American that's been to Syria,
yes,
do we have that information, and can we share it with the country that they're going to? Say they're going to France. Can we legally do that?
I have to go back and check the legal piece of it, but it is very much a reciprocal program, to get to your first point.
Right.
So any new requirements that we put on citizens, they will consider and legally have to put on to us. And similarly, I mean, we're sharing our extracts of our terrorist watch list, including, a foreign fighter extract, with all of our VWP countries and others, because we want countries to screen against this data. And this is a global security program, considering beyond just the perimeters of the U.S.
Isn't it also true, and this is true of any database, you start out with a basic database and it's imperfect. And then the beauty of a database is you can continue to add to it. You can continue to improve it. And I think that's part of the attempt here is, we've got a certain database and we're seeing there's maybe holes in the data that we want to fill. And we want, so over time, the beauty of technology is it just builds upon itself. It gets better and better and better. It's never perfect, but it gets better and better. And I think that's, certainly some things you were talking about, Dr. Fry, in your testimony.
That's right. I think to reinforce a couple of these points, the information that's required under the visa waiver program either incentivizes or sometimes can, the threat of potential punishment can make sure that countries are sharing what they should be sharing. And if they're not, we're aware of it and can address it. I'd like to point out that, sort of by definition, visa waiver program countries are strong allies to begin with. So I don't want to overstate the point that there was never information sharing between the United States and the United Kingdom or the United States and France before we implemented this requirement. Of course there was. They're good allies. Security and law enforcement services share all the time. But this structures it, as colleague says, and makes it mandatory, and we can potentially take remedial action if a country is not meeting their obligations. And then just very quickly to finish the other two components, the third element that makes the visa waiver program a security tool is secure travel documents. Again, this is something that exists as a requirement for travelers under the VWP, but not for travelers who come under visas, that you have to have an electronic passport, which is much more fraud resistant and incorporates biometric identifiers. At the moment, as I think you know, because your bill addresses it, there's a small percentage of VWP travelers who don't have to carry those passports, and the bill closes that loophole to make all visa waiver travelers do it, and so that's a good thing, but it's a much better assurance of not being able to use a fake passport to use the program. And then finally, and this is a point that I think sometimes gets overlooked, the law mandates that DHS lead inspections and audits of visa waiver program countries at least every other year, but in practice, DHS is working with the State Department and other interagency partners to set up more or less your continuing monitoring system of developments in these countries. But I'd like to focus just a minute on the inspections, having participated in a number of them. They're unbelievably comprehensive, sort of soup to nuts reviews of a country's border security, aviation security, passport development and issuance processes, counterterrorism capabilities. And it's a way through DHS, for the U.S. government more broadly, to have visibility into how a country does security. And if we find that there are gaps, whether in information sharing or whether in what a country does with respect to its counter-radicalization programs or its foreign fighter tracking programs, we have the ability to know that country X is not up to our standards, and we can work collaboratively with that country to fix them, maybe sharing additional information with them, providing technical assistance, what have you. But without that visibility, we wouldn't have as much information. And so these inspections are, I think, incredibly powerful tools to make sure that visa waiver program countries are actually meeting the standards that we set. And if they're not, because it is a collaborative program, to help them get to those standards.
Before I kind of throw it open to other members here, I did want, in your testimony, you talked about requiring VWP travelers to submit biometrics, photographs, and fingerprints prior to boarding a flight would not meaningfully improve the security. To the contrary, it would result in enormous resource, logistical, and diplomatic challenges. Can you talk about that?
Yes, Senator, happy to. So, and my colleagues hopefully can weigh in on the security benefit or minimal security benefit at the moment. But let me talk for a minute about the logistical challenges and the resource challenges in doing so. There are, as I see it, there are primarily two ways you could set up such a system to capture biometrics to ensure that the person submitting them is actually the person who's traveling. You'd either have to direct the people to embassies and consulates overseas, and those in visa waiver countries in particular are not staffed and resourced to handle that extra flow, or you could set up enrollment centers. Again, how many you'd need and all over the world would be quite a logistical challenge, so that some trusted agent can oversee the submission of fingerprints, and then of course there's IT connecting it back to CBP. So that's one method of doing it. Enormously expensive to have personnel doing this overseas. Some folks have suggested maybe you do a kiosk at the airport. Again, very difficult for me to imagine how this works logistically, in part because it's not just kiosks at visa waiver program country airports. It's kiosks at every airport all over the world, because if you're, let's say, a British citizen living in Hong Kong and you want to travel to the United States for business, you can leave under the VWP from Hong Kong. So we'd have to put these kiosks in Hong Kong, in Beijing, in Moscow, in all sorts of places that are not visa waiver program countries, and then somehow set up a sorting system so that the visa waiver program travelers are submitting biometrics and not the U.S. citizen returning home, et cetera. Enormous logistical challenge to do that overseas. So that's the logistical and diplomatic side. The security side is all visa waiver program travelers are actually, they submit their biometrics at the port of entry already when they arrive. Fingerprints are taken, digital photograph is taken. And I'll defer to my colleagues here, but I'm not aware of a lot of people being turned away every day at ports of entry because biometrics are otherwise identifying threats that we didn't know about. And in part, that's because the watch lists we have today are biographically based. And so the biographic vetting that CBP is doing is casting folks, and submitting a biometric is not, as far as I know, turning up hundreds or thousands of people who we otherwise didn't have derogatory information on.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks. No, so I'll turn it over to Senator Carper, but again, with the colleagues who just joined us, I want this to be pretty free-flowing, so feel free to, particularly on something while we're talking about it, rather than have it be disjointed. I want this kind of an open discussion, but with that, Senator Carper.
Yeah, I apologize for being late. Senator Feinstein, as you know, has a bill, maybe a draft bill, I don't know if it's been introduced, but it would require for the gathering of the biometrics before people get on a plane under the visa waiver program. You've explained why that's impractical, maybe counterproductive. The idea of, she had like a 5-year implementation period for that. The idea of doing a pilot in lieu of her approach, and try it and see if what we can learn from that pilot, or what doesn't work, and maybe what does work. Would the other witnesses just briefly say your response to that, your reaction to maybe a pilot that would set up over the next year? Is it Barisi?
Barisi.
Yeah, Ms. Barisi, nice to see you. Please.
Well, I mean, we're open to any requirements that are adding a practical security value to the program, whether it be something that's referring or if it's a nexus to biometrics or other. So, I mean, we are absolutely, we're trying to work very hard to address any security gap that may arise as a result of the changing threat environment.
Okay, let's just hold it at that.
As far as a biometric, I'm sorry?
I just want a reaction to a pilot on the biometric collection side, and you're open to that?
We're open to a biometric pilot, of course, and we're looking to expand pre-clearance as another
that's fine.
capability.
Just hold it there. You'll have a chance to say that. But I'm trying to get to the reactions to the pilot, please. Take me to the pilot. Lead me to the...
I think we're contemplating some pilots in the context of some of the pre-clearance discussions that we're having, and perhaps there's some other ways looking at pre-clearance that could involve some type of biometric collection pilot, apart from what we've done traditionally.
Thank
so
you.
it was more in the context of that.
Yeah, Mr. Sibrel, your reaction to a pilot, just briefly.
I would only just say that the program is based on a concept of reciprocity. So to the degree that a pilot is begun in a country, then that could be reciprocal to U.S. citizens seeking to travel to that particular country. But that's the only reaction I have.
And Mr. Frey, just a quick reaction.
I think I would agree with what Kellyanne said. In general, a pilot can make sense. But I don't know, I guess in my view, what a pilot would potentially show us, in that I don't think it's a question of technology. I think the technology certainly exists to be able to capture fingerprints overseas and send them back. I think the question, so you can show that it works. I think you probably still find that you're not getting a lot of hits out of those pilots because we're not getting them today at the ports of entry. But even if you establish the system works, you're still faced with a scalable problem going forward. And I'm still not sure how you address the overall implementation, even if you had a successful pilot.
No. I'm not going to ask him now. There's someone in the audience, Mr. Chairman, colleagues. George Selim, I think, is in the audience. George, would you raise your hand? Yeah, thanks. And George, I've told you the head of the Office of Community Partnership within DHS, is that right? At some point in time, I'm going to ask you to take that seat right there, and we'll just talk about that program. And well, I think that's a hugely important initiative, and we would welcome your participation, but I'll yield for now. Thank you. I apologize for being late.
Senator Peters, unless somebody wants to jump. Oh, Senator Portman.
First, thanks for having this roundtable. I think it's really important. And, a lot of the things that have come up today help to clarify what we're going to do legislatively. I think Congress will act, and the House has already acted overwhelmingly, bipartisan basis. I guess my question goes to this fundamental issue of the fact that our security here in this country is only as good as the data that's being provided to us by our visa waiver partners. So these 38 countries have different databases. Some are better than others, as you all said this morning. And so drilling down a little bit further on that, let's assume that the numbers are right, that there are about 5,000 foreign fighters from Western European countries alone, the bulk of them coming from France, UK, Belgium. That means there's more than 5,000 total from those 38 countries. I still haven't gotten a good number on that, so if you have one today, we'd like to have it. I've heard 8,000. I've heard we don't know. I've heard it's more than 5,000. But let's, if you don't mind, let me ask a further question. Maybe some of you can give me what you think the answer is on how many people we're talking about. The question I would have is really a pretty simple one. If you have a porous border with Turkey, as we have in our borders with Mexico and Canada. And you have the ability to go back and forth without being identified through that porous border. And you have thousands of foreign fighters who are leaving Europe to go into the battle. A number of them have come back, we're told. We have a number on that. I don't know if it's accurate or not. How do we know the information is accurate? In other words, they wouldn't show up, right, in the preclearance or the ESTA data necessarily because they're walking across a border. And we've certainly seen the refugees going the other way. So could you comment on that? And I don't know who, Dr. Frey, maybe you're the right person to start, but also I'd like to hear from Commissioner Wagner on it. But anybody jump in. How do you account for that, and how good is the data?
Yeah, well.
So when we're looking at the ESTA program and the background checks and the vetting that we do with that, we're not looking at a specific trip. This is, before they book their travel, this is authorization basically to book travel to come to the U.S. So looking at a person's travel history is going to be a little complicated at that point if it's not including previous routes to the U.S. Really where we see the most value is looking at the data sets that we do collect. The biographical information, the contact information, some of their points of contact, and a few other pieces, and trying to draw associations with that to other known pieces of information that we know does give us national security concerns. And drawing any link analysis or any type of associations we can to other people, and then bouncing it through a lot of the intelligence community to see the holdings that they have, if any of these data sets show up in any of the information that they have. And then we pull it back into our data holdings and see, well, who's connected to this email address?
I guess what I'm getting at, though, is the gaps. So in testimony before this committee 7 weeks ago, approximately, the director of the FBI and the director of the Counterterrorism Center both said the same thing. We have gaps. And they were referring specifically to the gaps in Syria because we have nothing on the ground there to be able to collect information. We don't have a relationship with the government. Even as compared to Iraq, we don't have the data. But I guess my question is, I'm not suggesting this is necessarily a large number of people, but as we've learned with terrorism, it doesn't matter that it's a large number or a small number. Any number is significant. We have to be right every time. They have to be right once. So are there people who are going to go across this border that's porous, where there's no means to identify them, come back to a visa waiver country, and us not be able to have that data in our system? Are you saying, Commissioner Wagner, that because we use other data sources, including our own, that is unlikely to occur? Or are you saying that we've only got what we've got, which is that our security, again, is going to be based on ultimately the best information we get from these countries, and there's going to be some gaps?
Right. We use what we have access to and what's provided to us. So it's a mixture of what the intelligence community and the law enforcement community can provide to us through information sharing agreements. And then the data that we do collect, what associations can we draw upon that to other pieces of information that we have?
I would just say that the problem you're identifying really, it transcends the visa waiver program, that this is a common concern of governments globally, even those that are outside the visa waiver program.
Right.
This idea of getting a handle on who is going off to these conflicts, already radicalized, gaining networking, gaining techniques and capabilities they could bring back to their home countries. So there has been a tremendous concentration by intelligence services, law enforcement entities to try to get a handle on this and exchange information. We use the visa waiver program, as I noted earlier, as almost a lever, really, for those countries that are participants. And again, as noted by Dr. Frey, these are 38 countries that, generally speaking, share the fairly high level of capability, and they certainly share the concern we do on the foreign fighter problem. So they're probably our best partners. Now, there's a wide diversity of countries in the program: Japan, Luxembourg, France, all different capabilities, Chile, some of which have a more acute foreign fighter program, particularly those Western European countries, and the numbers you've cited are the kinds of that we've heard.
What is your number, the number of foreign fighters from visa waiver countries?
I don't know that I have the number, and I think NCTC is the best source of that data for estimates. But The important point here
But you
is
think the 5 to 8 is roughly
I've heard
accurate? 5
around
to
that
8,000?
number from Western Europe. So, I mean, visa waiver program, of course, extends beyond Western Europe, but that is the larger numbers come from those visa waiver countries. Not so many from East Asian participants. But I think this is the critical problem: is how do we build those watch lists? And we probably have the best watch list of all, and that's why through HSPD 6, which is a requirement under the program, we provide that what's called foreign partner extract of the about 90,000 names, and then we have even a smaller number, which is the foreign fighter extract. And we're giving that to countries, even that aren't participants in HSPD 6 agreements, because we want them to have that watch list so that they can bounce those names against all of the people they're
And look, I've taken probably more time than I should, but we're glad that the visa waiver program has resulted in us getting better information and better data. On the other hand, I don't think you can tell us here today that the visa waiver program requires a more strenuous screening than the visa program. In other words, visa waiver program is there for a reason. It's to facilitate travel. We support, facilitate business travel and so on. What we're asking is, given the fact that the requirements are not as stringent, even though more data was collected because of it, what do we do about this potential gap? And specifically the foreign fighters who can go back and forth to a certain extent without identification.
So
It's going to be the same issue if they're applying for a visa. If we don't have access to the information, State Department doesn't have access to the information either if it doesn't exist.
You think there's no difference?
There's not going to be much of a difference between the visa vetting and the visa waiver vetting as far as the biographical data collected in the systems that they're run against to identify risks.
yeah.
Isn't the main difference is
If
you
if the travel information doesn't exist in the U.S. government holdings, neither one of us are going to get to it.
The biographic
But there's
checks that we're doing are the same. The biometric checks that we're doing are the same. There are interviews with a government official for both, albeit one is State Department and one is CBP, and they would occur at a different time. That's the big distinction. So, and in terms of the biometrics, we have biometrics on 3/4 of the VWP traveling population. So that is when CBP gets the APIS manifest data, we ping against our databases to see if we have biometric holdings on those. Full checks are done at the POE. So it is not that there's actually distinctions. Some of it is when, and really the differential would be the first-time travelers. So for a first-time visa applicant for business and tourism purposes, which is the equivalent of ESTA, business and tourist purposes, you get an interview and a biometric collected on your first application. But even State Department, upon a renewal for a visa, you don't get an interview or your biometrics taken again. So that you do it once and then you don't get that again. So and there's lots of reasons for that. And most of our derogatory information is associated with biographic information. And the biographic checks, as you've heard us all, I think all of us at this point have said, are the same between a visa and an ESTA.
I think to define the reality, I think it's really important to make that comparison. Now, where would we be at had there never been a visa waiver program? What would the system look like? What gaps would there be? I mean, there's always going to be gaps in information. There's no perfect information. Are we better off today because of visa waiver, or are we worse off? And then really to the heart, what is the difference right now in the current state of play between getting a visa, having to go to the consulate and having an interview versus the visa waiver program? I think that's kind of the reality I'm trying to lay out
And
here.
the number of denials.
So
Because
Mark-
in the visa program, you have a lot, people are screened out.
Well, I think that
Right, they're screened out for
Numbers.
various reasons.
Right.
There's the national security reasons, of course, but there's also the, are they going to comply with the terms of that visa, depending on what type of visa they're applying for. And that could be establishing ties to their home country. That could be that they're not registered for school. That could be, various reasons depending on the type of visa. So, but the national security vetting based on the biographic data collected and the queries that are run is going to be comparable between the two. So we actually take this. We're involved with State Department and with ICE in a percentage of initial visa applications in the vetting and make sure all consistent database checks are run and adjudication is similar. And then we also take the visa database and run the entire contents perpetually for any type of national security information. Then we can feed back to ICE and Department of State any type of national security concerns that we uncover, and that we can request a revocation of that information, just like we do the ESTA database. But it's the same queries against the same data that's run consistently between the two at that point from a national security perspective.
And you have to get an ESTA every 2 years. That's typically the validity period of an ESTA. So not only is it recurrently vetted for that entire period of time, but then an individual has to resubmit their information every 2 years, and we will rerun it, and we'll know real time if anything is hitting, say, the terrorist screening database. We'll know in real time, and that's the same for a visa as well.
Well, in that regard, it's
If
better
there's
than
new
a visa. If you're a
information.
10-year visa, you're not every 2 years.
And right, correct. And that way it is better than you're absolutely right. Thank you, State Department. Better than a visa in that sense, that every 2 years that applicant is providing us that information. And I don't want to, Senator Portman, I don't want to lose your point for the other security benefits that Mark outlined initially. Not only do countries have to meet certain security standards in order to be in the visa waiver program, they have to maintain them. The intrusive, robust reviews that Mark was talking about earlier, they last about 6 to 9 months. We do them at least every 2 years. And I mean, we are sitting in their border agency booths. We are at their border looking at how they do this. We are in their passport issuance facilities. No other program allows the U.S. government to go in and do such an intrusive review. And I don't believe we provide that.
Can I ask you a question related?
It is without fail adding those additional layers of security that just don't exist in others.
Then can I get in the queue?
Just a couple of follow-up questions to this immediate discussion. Differences between people who go through a visa process and the visa waiver process. I've heard the total number per year for visa waiver countries is roughly 20 million. Is that accurate? What are the aggregate numbers of folks who actually secure visas to come in? Just roughly.
But
I mean,
while he's getting
within a million.
Right, but I think one of the points that I wanted to follow up on what Kellyanne said, just so we're all on the same page for sort of apples to apples, the visa waiver program is really only waiving B1 and B2 visas, which are short-term, 90-day business or tourism travel.
That's kind of where I was getting.
Right, there's a whole list of other visa categories, whether student visas, employment visas, fiancé visas that have been in the news that are different. The biographic vetting that we should, and the vetting we're talking about to have a true comparison is B1, B2 visas that the State Department issues, including to people in visa waiver program countries who don't qualify for the VWP.
Yeah, and
VWP travel.
On this point, when you get a visa, part of it is about your intent moving forward, not looking in the background prior, that you've amassed prior. So I want to come to study, or I want to come to go to a funeral of an extended family member, and I will only be there for X number of days and I'll leave again, that we don't capture any of that intent in the visa waiver program. Would that be an accurate statement?
Well, the presumption and the requirement is that you're there for 90 days or less for business or tourism purposes.
But it's a presumption.
It's presumption, but there's but there are ways.
The inspection at the port of entry on arrival is going to take place. Why are you coming here? Where are you going? What are you doing? Those types of questions.
And then the aggregate number of all visas, do we have a rough?
14 million visa applications, 1.6 million denials.
Okay, and how many denials in the visa waiver program?
So we denied about 60,000 ESTA applications last year.
So 60,000 out of 20 million?
No. We did about 13.8 million applications. Now, remember, they're good for 2 years. So we had nearly 22 million visa waiver travelers last year. We had 112 million commercial air passengers total. So visa waiver makes things, it's maybe 18% of the total population of commercial air travels. Most visa waiver travelers are going to come to the U.S. via commercial aviation. So it's about 18% come through the visa waiver program. About 50% are U.S. citizens, permanent residents, and then the difference there are the visa holders.
I wanted to get back to the biometrics for a second. Dr. Frey, you talked about a couple of different ways if one wanted to collect it prior to arrival in the United States. You talked about sort of adding that function to embassies and consulates. You talked about setting up new centers, and then you talked about kiosks at every airport, every international airport. I guess I'm curious to know whether, following up on Senator Carper's question about piloting, would it be useful for us to pilot all three, depending on the country, just to gain some expertise, gain some insight into how those would work?
Well, I think with respect to the pilots, it's not about whether it could work. I think it could. It's a question of benefit versus cost. Because obviously biometrics are taken every day at embassies and consulates all over the world. So they're capable of doing it. In some of these visa waiver countries, of course, they haven't been issuing regularly B1, B2 visas now for close to 30 years. The State Department staffing and resources just doesn't exist in Paris, for example, to do that for all the visa waiver travelers who would come from France. So you either have to ramp up the Foreign Service pretty significantly and probably buy more office space and anything else, or you'd have to set up some sort of satellite location, again, staffed either by government employees or some sort of contractor to oversee biometric enrollment. So it's not that it wouldn't work. It's just that it's a pretty massive undertaking. And again, from what I see at the moment to be very minimal security benefits than we're getting now with both the biographic vetting that goes on and the biometric vetting that goes on at the ports of entry when these visa waiver program travelers arrive. So it's not that it's not worthwhile, it's that it's not worthwhile compared to the cost of doing so. At least that's my view.
Even on a pilot scale?
Well, I think the pilot could work. It's just a question of what do you do when the pilot says, okay, we are able to do this. We have the technology to do it. How then do you scale it realistically to actually move to capture the 20 million visa waiver program travelers? And I don't know that there's a good answer to that.
We discussed what would we hope to gain out of by doing this? Is it the fact that an imposter might be applying for this benefit, using different biographical information, and we might have a fingerprint record on that person? For national security concerns, that number is going to be very low, that there's fingerprints associated with national security concerns compared to what we have access to with the biographical information. If it's a concern that a wrong person's going to board the plane using somebody else's document, I think that concern is going to transcend against all travelers, that they could board a plane as a different person. And then you're looking at the biometrics would have to be collected pretty much upon boarding a flight to the United States, which is a whole different set of issues. And that's why we have the discussion, okay, we could collect biometrics, but where do we collect them that they're meaningful for what problem we're trying to solve? Right now, we're collecting the biometrics from the visa waiver traveler when they arrive in the U.S. This is after they have gone through the ESTA application, the biographical information that's been vetted through all of our different holdings, including the intelligence community, and then perpetually vetted. It's after they've booked travel to the United States, and then we've received it, looked at the reservation information, looked at the airline manifest information, run that through a very intensive series of vetting queries to look at known pieces of information that's bad, and then travel patterns that would give us concern. That, looking at intelligence reports and real-life events, what about this person's itinerary would raise some red flags for us? A male of a certain age with a certain type of passport traveling from certain parts of the world are going to give us more concern than others. And we set conditions in our databases to flag this type of information for us. We have an extensive set of information we apply against this to do that. So they go through that level of vetting and review. Then when they arrive in the United States, they go through the interview with the CBP officer, and we collect the full set of biometrics. So it's really the point in time, like Kelly mentioned, where do you really do that when they go through this whole level of review? Is it worthwhile to do it pre-departure through the Department of State like a visa? But then what type of information are you really trying to get to collect that? And that's really what we've been discussing. The biometrics are helpful. As an operator, we want them. It's where's the right place in the process to get them that we don't shut down air travel and we don't harm ourselves versus the more good that we're trying to do. And that's what we're just trying to balance here is where's the right place to take it, because what information to really get from it.
The question I have related several things that we've talked about. One is the biometric information validating this is the person standing in front of me that I also have the document for. Do we have any way to be able to track a number or a guess of how many people would try to come through and have a document that's false?
So for visa waiver travelers, last year it was about 0.02%.
So give me an idea of what number that is.
So it's 476.
Okay. It's pretty good off the top of your head.
I got it written down.
Yeah.
476.
Where we had biometric hits on them.
Where that
Zero
person
for
standing in,
national security. This is upon arrival. In the
right,
US.
upon arrival, they arrive, they're showing you a document. and
None
you
were for
say,
national
"This
security.
is
They
not-"
were all for immigration admissibility issues in relation to the entering under the visa waiver program. But
Right.
none were for national security reasons.
Okay. So the question is then, we caught it there at entry for all of those, or where are we picking that up?
Yes, that was upon entry, upon arrival in the U.S.
That's based on facial recognition, I would assume, that we have, looking at the passport and what we see and taking their photo as well.
It's based upon us interviewing the passenger, reviewing the passport, reading the passport in our database, performing the system queries on that, taking those fingerprints and comparing them against the information on those fingerprints, which is our biometric watch list, which includes criminal information and other types of databases.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Senator. Go ahead.
Go ahead if it's on that topic. Is that-
Well, it sort of is, because I hadn't heard that 476 number before, but I think this speaks a bit, Senator Baldwin, to your point about piloting effectiveness, and it's about timing. We're collecting the biometrics now. If the end result of all those things is 476 hits, none for national security concerns, it seems to me that's an awfully small benefit to deploy a worldwide biometric collection system in advance of travel. Right? If that number were, 470,000, and some of those are national security, well, then maybe you could make the argument that it's worth doing this in advance. But if we're doing it already and it's resulting in 476 hits, none of which are for national security, that seems fairly compelling to me that doing it in advance is not going to give us a security benefits.
Again, that's out of 222 million.
Right. We denied entry to over 9,000 visa waiver travelers last year for a variety of reasons. That was after they arrived and got here. This was after denying 60,000 ESTA applications in advance. So you can see as we pare the numbers down.
Okay, let me follow up on something Senator Portman talked about before about travel, because I've heard a lot of conversation about we'll have a higher priority of focusing on individuals that have traveled to known terrorist safe havens. The term's been thrown around multiple times. It ends up being Iraq and Syria. Now, the challenge there, as Senator Portman mentioned before, very few folks are going into Syria checking documents at the airport and checking in to say, oh, look, your passport's stamped Syria. They're coming in from Lebanon. They're coming in from Turkey. Do you have a sense of confidence that when someone throws around, we're going to try to kick out individuals that have traveled to Iraq and Syria, that we're catching all individuals that have tracked to Iraq and Syria, or that we're not tracking someone that went to Iraq to go visit a dying grandmother that's there, that's a family member? So talk us through the process of how someone would evaluate this person has traveled to a known terrorist safe haven area when we're not getting a passport stamp from Syria.
So we would look at whether or not the intelligence community or the law enforcement community has provided any information to us through their classified holdings that we could bounce our information that we collect on the traveler against that to draw any associations, more than just a name check. If they're using a cell phone or an email address that we could connect to something somebody else picked up that we could relate to, that would probably be our most capable way of doing that right now. If they booked travel that was continuous through there, or if they had, if they were leaving from the U.S. and going to a certain part of the world for 6 months, 8 months with a return back, and they had certain characteristics, that might also cause us to look closer at that one. That's where I look at
But someone traveling that's a French national, someone that's a French national traveling to Lebanon and is in Lebanon for 90 days and then returns back to France is not going to show up, and we don't know if that individual crossed the border from Lebanon to go fight in Syria and then crossed back and is now returning.
You don't know.
No, that would not show. I'm not sure.
Right, that wouldn't show up at all.
It might not. It might not. And that there's absolutely those who seek to enter Syria, knowing that governments are watching out for that, are going to break their travel. They're going to disguise their travel effectively. So this is why you have to rely upon the intelligence community, which is working cooperatively with partners across Europe to identify those persons that may be suspect in that regard.
Sure. Okay, so that's one area, because we hear that kicked around all the time on that. Then you talk about this reciprocal agreement several times of our relationships and how we're going to other countries and do rigorous, I think, Kelly, you even mentioned rigorous inspections active. Do we have other nations coming and inspecting our facilities and our checking processes that are also coming and doing rigorous checks on us and our systems?
Not even nearly, not close to what we do. I mean, it is not
But
considered
yes,
a
they
national
do. Other
level.
nations do come check our systems.
No, no.
We don't have
they do
anyone that's
not.
doing that?
It's not a requirement. What we do is we offer to share best practices and show how we do things. So we've certainly had our international allies come and have those conversations. These are ongoing dialogues. But no, they have not come in to inspect our facilities and sit in our CBP inspection booths or anything similar.
We're the big dog on the block. Senator Ayotte.
Thank you. So in the San Bernardino situation, that was a fiancé visa issue. Are you able to speak to that issue in terms of what type of vetting we do in that instance? Because I think people want to understand what happened there and how that visa system perhaps differs from what we're talking about today in the visa waiver system. Can anyone speak to that?
Sure. My colleague from the Consular Affairs Services can speak to that. Go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. My name is Edward Ramatowski, and I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Visa Services at the Department of State. With respect to the San Bernardino case, yes, indeed, that was a fiancé visa, which is a type of visa issued to the fiancé of a U.S. citizen for the purpose of coming to the United States to get married within 90 days. And I can confirm, as the Department has already said, that all applicable security checks were done for that individual, Ms. Malik. That includes an immigrant visa interview. It includes facial recognition screening. It includes interagency counterterrorism screening. It included a review by the Visa Security Unit of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which has a detachment in Islamabad in our embassy there. And it included full biometric fingerprint checks. And in all cases, the results of those checks were clear. There were no indications of any ill intent by that individual at the time the visa was issued.
There have been public reports that there was some information that was wrong on the application, I believe on an address. Can you share what type of information or investigation are done on applications that are submitted to verify what the applicant is saying is true?
That varies by application and by location. If we have doubts about a particular part of a visa application, our embassies and consulates have anti-fraud units that can investigate further to verify the data on an application form. With respect to this particular case, I'll have to defer there's an investigation in progress led by the FBI. We have shared all of our details and records with them, and we're working closely with them on any of the data that was provided.
So as I understand it, in terms of verification, it depends on the circumstances, so it's not something done consistently on each application for example, the information that I would fill out on a form, where I've lived, connections like that.
We verify information if the officer has reason to believe that there might be something incorrect or inaccurate about it.
So the officer has to get a flag. In other words, it's not
That's
routinely
right.
done. Okay,
That's
thank
right.
you. I wanted to follow up on, in the Paris attacks, one of the attackers reportedly came through Greece in a visa waiver as a refugee, obviously. And that has raised the discussion we previously had in this committee about the vetting of our refugee program, upon which many of us have raised concerns. But Greece is a visa waiver country. And so presumably, had that individual come as through the refugee process, and how do we understand, are we confident in, for example, the information we get from Greece? Because how confident are we, and I'm going to use Greece as an example, in the information that we get from Greece? Because as I hear the testimony here today and some of the prior hearings we've had on the visa waiver program, one of the things that we've collectively been concerned about is that there seems to be a difference of what we're getting from certain countries and the breadth of the intelligence sharing and the depth upon the knowledge that we get. And I'd like to know if you disagree with that last characterization, that there's a difference and there's inconsistency, and if you can answer the Greece question as well.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
So just to kind of level set the start of your question, is that refugees cannot travel under the visa waiver program. So it's citizens of the VWP countries that can utilize the VWP traveler for business or tourist reasons to fly to the United States.
Now, I understand that. I'm using it as an example of how people are going through countries.
Sure. I am confident that all VWP countries have signed information sharing arrangements, that countries are sharing that information, that we, the United States, are sharing our list with other countries, and in particular to Greece. I'm actually traveling there next week. I leave Saturday as part of our review process. So I will get a greater insight firsthand from Greece.
So here's my concern. We've signed all the forms among the countries. We're relying on this situation that Senator Portman and Senator Langford have talked about, where you've admitted to us that, and I think it's consistent with what our FBI director has said, essentially with the porous borders, we saw previously in the Charlie Hebdo attacks that some of the attackers actually had traveled to Yemen for training with al-Qaeda and then committed the attacks. And then we see the situation where Europe is frankly overwhelmed in terms of the number of foreign fighters that have traveled to join up with ISIS and then return to their shores. And so we've seen the FBI director say, listen, if you haven't made a ripple in the water in Syria, we may not know. And so we could basically query our databases till the cows come home, but if the information never gets in the database, then we're not going to know, and someone, therefore, is not going to get that extra level of scrutiny that they should receive. And so I want to get at this issue of where are the countries that we're having the most problem with a lack of robust intelligence to make sure that it's not so much filling out a form. It's not like we'll provide you what you got. Who is giving us the most? Who's not giving us the most? Where can we do better? Because I find it hard to believe that they're providing us, every single country in this program, all that they can and should do. Are you telling me that every country in this program is doing all that they can and should do to provide us intelligence?
Senator Ray, I can add one thing to that question as well, and that is for those migrants that do come in, whether it be Greece or wherever, how long do they have to remain in that country before they get a passport from that country? Do we have a consistent system, or do we know what the system is for individuals that go into Greece as a migrant? Do they stay there 2 years and then they get a passport? When could they get a Greek passport then? Apologize for that.
I appreciate that.
You look like you want to.
No, I was going to answer that specific point. That generally speaking varies by country according to their own citizenship laws and processes. That is something, though, that's reviewed very closely by the visa waiver program inspections that we've been talking about. By my recollection, because I actually led one or two inspections of Greece several years ago, Greece has a fairly robust process for that. So it's actually very difficult in Greece to come in as a refugee and get a Greek passport. In part, there are language requirements and things like that the Greeks enforce. So that may be one, but it varies country by country according to their own internal laws. But as a general rule, the visa waiver program and the inspections require that the progress or the process is robust. You don't show up one day and then a week later have that country's passport. But it does vary.
That's right, and just to make sure I answer your question as well, I'm very happy to talk about specific countries and where they are. I don't think it's appropriate in an open setting to discuss very specific countries or the levels of sharing. And what
Okay,
they're sharing.
so
But
can you
happy to
just
do
answer
that.
me yes or no? Are we receiving all that we believe we can receive and full cooperation of robust intelligence sharing with every single country to their fullest extent in this visa waiver program? Is the answer yes or no to that?
I believe if they know someone is a bad individual that is
Are they
going
sharing
to
all their
harm,
intelligence
then
they can share?
Then they will share that with us. If
But they
know.
will, or are they? I mean, this is what we're trying to get at. We don't have to get into specific countries, but we're trying to figure out, is there more that we need to push on a gap of intelligence that will make this program stronger?
So here's where the enhancements that Secretary Johnson announced in August is we have the information sharing arrangements. That's not the issue. There's the individuals, foreign fighters that they're aware of, they're sharing. What we would like is and would help, and we appreciate where these requirements are codified in statute, is using that information for their border decisions and pushing it out and then letting the United States know when they have an encounter of those individuals. So that's kind of the piece where we are focusing on and pushing that can strengthen the VWP program.
So can I quick hop in here? Again, I think my understanding is there's a minimum threshold to qualify for the visa waiver program. Because of the audits, if you're not meeting that minimum threshold, we can suspend the visa waiver program. We've done that. We've done that with Argentina, Uruguay, and Belgium. I think the question, from my standpoint, the question I'd be asking, are there any countries right now that are under review? We don't have to name the countries that we aren't satisfied with, that we may be evaluating for suspending the visa waiver program because they're not meeting that minimum threshold. Understanding that, stipulating that there's a variety of information in 38 different countries, you're going to have different capabilities in providing information, and I'll always go back to the point, what's the alternative? But, I mean, so where are we at in terms of spectrum? 38 countries, are they all for sure meeting the minimum threshold and above? Are some of them on the bubble, or where are we at?
So 38 countries, we do about 19 reviews a year. At the end of all the reviews, we're providing reports to Congress. Each one of those reviews is accompanied by an intelligence assessment. I'm not sure if we remember to mention that important part earlier. And the countries that may change their security posture in some respect that gives us concern at all, we have a lot of different options. We can review them more regularly. We can put them in provisional status. We can suspend them. And certainly the last resort would be terminating them. And that's not where we want to jump to immediately because it is a global security program. And if everybody fails the security measures, then that doesn't help our global community, and that wouldn't help the United States either. So there are a few countries in the provisional status today. They get significant additional oversight, monitoring, questions,
Can you name those?
visits. I'm happy to do that in a different setting. Happy to do that in a different setting.
But again, that is more classified in terms of.
Well, if there's any type of security issue, I hesitate to announce it as.
It's not public if you're on the provisional status?
No.
Visa waiver?
No.
Could I just jump in here to the chairman's point? This is a process that is ongoing. It's not like we take a photograph and then a couple of years later we come back and we take another, like a photograph of their procedures. No, this is ongoing, and the audits don't just last a day or a week or a month. They last an extended period of time, and I think we need to be mindful. We We have in place a process that says, there'll be changes of government. Some may be more or less cooperative, more committed to the agreement of the original, when these folks join us in the visa waiver program. We want to make sure that we know that there's been a change. And if they do change, it's to their advantage to be in this program. They want to be in this program. And we want them to be in this program, but we want them to be fully compliant with the conditions.
Absolutely, as do I. And that's one of the benefits of the visa waiver program is they have to meet standards that countries that are just issuing visas don't have to meet. So not only are we doing vetting that is identical but in different places as the visa, they're also meeting additional standards, and we get to go in and review them to make sure they're maintaining those standards. And we recurrently vet the ESTAs when we're talking about the vetting on the individual traveler, and we're collecting their biometrics every time they travel. So it could be a 2-year ESTA, but every time they travel, they're meeting up with a CBP officer, they're taking their prints, they're having them checked, they're having an interview. I mean, that is a continuous and ongoing process.
I'd say to provide some clarity, let me just kind of ask this question, see if anybody disagrees with it. My sense is, again, talking about databases and just continue to improve them, nothing's ever perfect, but are we less safe or more secure because the visa waiver program over the, let's say after 9/11? I mean, have we continued to build those databases? Have we continued to improve it? Are we better off because of it, or are we worse off? I mean, my sense is we're better off. Not saying it's perfect, not saying that there's things, and I do want to get to the point of, what are the things that have to be improved. But anybody disagree with the fact?
No, sir, and I'd like to actually make a follow-up point to that. I think you're absolutely right. There's always room to do better, and the program is not static, as Senator Carper mentioned. It's always evolving. The reviews are always ongoing. But more than that, and I think this is something also that Senator Carper said, countries want to be in the program, and that includes both countries in the program who want to keep their status, but we shouldn't lose sight of countries outside of the program who want to get in, and the program serves as it serves as an incentive to raise their security standards. There are countries who are on the outside looking in who have signed some of these information sharing agreements because they want to get in, even though that may not happen for another 5 years.
I can say, as the chairman of the European Subcommittee on Foreign Relations, trust me, their countries want to get in the visa waiver program.
But they're making practical changes.
And they are working hard. They are working hard.
And that benefits everybody.
It's a powerful incentive. It just is.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree entirely that the program, because it is underpinned by these requirements that we are continually assessing and pushing for improvement upon, absolutely makes us safer in that regard, because to remain a member, and actually there is the issue of the incentives and disincentives to remaining a member or losing membership. That's important, and there are self-interests there. But fundamentally, these 38 countries are the countries we should be partnering with to strengthen global security. And whereas 9/11 was an experience that hit us and required us to break down stovepipes and improve our border security, these attacks in Europe are really galvanizing those governments, and they're pushing and understanding the threat as we are. The foreign fighter threat is a global phenomenon. It's not limited to 1 or 2 countries. It's not a small number of people. So there is this incentive to collectively improve the program. And so just getting to one of the questions that Senator Ayat asked, we are also continually looking at strengthening those watch listing programs. So, for instance, one of the things we've been pushing on is for governments to be better about sharing information with Interpol, for instance. And that's a relatively new innovation to stress and push, and we're seeing real improvement there. And that's something that has to continue to build out so that we...
Let me just jump in. Sharing what kind of information? Beyond passports or including passports?
Yeah, lost and stolen passport database is the first one. But there's also sharing that can occur through other Interpol databases. We're actually working with FBI. FBI has agents at Interpol to help set up a foreign fighter database, and we are pushing countries to share their own watch listing data to build up that Interpol database. So these are opportunities actually for us to strengthen the whole network of information sharing.
VWP countries actually provide 70% of the records that are in the lost and stolen travel document database.
Let me say, working with members of the House, I know they just passed a visa waiver bill to strengthen it. I've introduced the companion bill that with some enhancements. Can I just kind of go through the provisions and see if there's anybody wants to comment on some of these things? I mean, it will deny visa waiver protection status to individuals who have connections to terrorist hotspots. So if you have dual citizenship with Iraq and Syria, you're not going to be able to utilize the visa waiver program, or if you traveled to countries with significant terrorist activity. I mean, I think in the current threat environment, that makes sense. And anybody disagree with that? But again, also understanding it's not a perfect system, as we talked about people going back and forth over the Turkish border. We may not have the information, but isn't this a common sense enhancement?
Yes, just verifying it can be difficult, as we discussed, but what it does give us, it gives us a binding declaration of what that person says, and if they do come here and we can determine otherwise that they have been to these zones and they said no, we have the ability to charge them with fraud, misrepresentation. Now it's a lifetime bar from ever even getting a visa.
Can I make a
Sure.
comment or ask a question about this point, just to think about when we're advancing legislation? So I had the honor of traveling with colleagues in my first year in the Senate to the Turkish border with Syria. And this was obviously a different situation then. ISIL wasn't as prominent as it is now. But one of our briefings was with a range of individuals, many of them U.S. citizens, but many of them European, who were parts of NGOs going in to provide humanitarian relief, who were briefing us on sort of the status of the civil war at that point in time. We got to talk to some journalists who were venturing in to try to do, war correspondent, basically. How would we keep our country safe, but also encourage that type of, if we want to encourage that type of humanitarian activity? Let me also note one other important sector of people, folks who are trying to participate in the political discussions to get a new government in Syria. And so trying to reach out to moderate Syrians to form that new government. How do we deal with
First of all, nobody's denying access to people coming in the country who've done that. It's just not allowing the visa waiver.
Yeah,
in other words, not waiving the interview. So.
Right, and that's.
Yeah, but how do, just generally, this is.
The visa waiver, denial of the visa waiver program allows us to push people over to the embassy for the consular interview and the collection of the biometrics. And then if they can overcome that reason and are eligible for a visa, State Department can issue one. So I think we would look for some flexibility to, in those cases, look at the person's purpose or intent of travel to that region. And then if there's flexibility in the legislation, or if not, they all go over to the embassy for the visa.
We've had discussions with our European partners, and they did mention those same categories, humanitarian workers, journalists in particular. There's one other category that has been noted, and those would be employees of international organizations, for instance, OPCW, those that went into Syria, for instance, to ensure the Syrian government did away with chemical weapons.
And by the way,
inspectors
and the bill does have that flexibility built in, acknowledging that fact. It demands stronger intelligence enforcement sharing, which is already occurring, but you just require people getting kicked out if they're not. And again, that's a powerful incentive to improve the process. We agree with that. Enhance the screening of all travelers for visa waiver protection companies or countries. There's just a number of enhancements. I do want to hop down to pre-clearance because we haven't talked about that. It's one of the things we've added. Hopefully we can get that passed here relatively quickly. Can anybody speak to the advantage of kind of pushing out our borders into these pre-clearance countries?
Well, pre-clearance gives us the best ability to, I think, address most of these concerns because we're able then to negotiate the authorities to operate on foreign soil and do our complete CBP inspection as if the person had flown here. So what we can do is we can do the admissibility determination, the interview of the person, the checking of the documents, the fingerprinting, the searching of them, the searching of their baggage. Before they step on board that aircraft, the U.S. government can put their hands on people and their belongings before they do get on board that transportation and fly here to the States. So that's why it gives us the best ability. And then the information sharing and the relationships we build with the host authorities, because we're on the ground working side by side with them, is also a tangential benefit of that.
So again, I was asking, I imagine you're all familiar with what the House is passing. Hopefully you've taken a look at our piece of legislation. Any cause for concern, any of those?
No, Senator, I think I would say, from my perspective, there aren't, and it gets back to, I think, one of the points I made earlier, that this is an evolving program. It should be, and that there are a number of sensible ways to improve security, some of which DHS has already done, like the ESTA improvements and additional data fields and some of the other things Kellyanne talked about, and there are some things that require statutory authority, and I think that makes sense.
Are we missing anything as you've reviewed these things? Are there other things we should be looking toward?
I'll just make one point, which is that, as been noted, 38 countries, there's quite a wide variety of capability and different perspectives on things like data privacy and the rest. So we'll have to work with each of these countries, some large, some small, some with capabilities that can be, some that are performing better, some that aren't performing as well. So it'll be, the implementation, and we'll need to work closely with those governments to ensure we can, make sure that, and as I said, there's a common perspective here. This isn't a difficult conversation in terms of anyone rejecting the idea of strengthening border security. Everyone is part of that project. There may be some, the receptivity, I think, will generally be very positive, but the questions of being able to implement each of the provisions within a fixed period of time may be a challenge, but we'll just have to work through that.
Without identifying the country, I just did meet with an ambassador for one of these countries that wants to get in the visa waiver program. One of the complaints was some of the requirements for specifically their threshold in terms of how many visas are denied. That's kind of outside of their control to a certain extent. And when you're going to an embassy, you're applying for a visa, and now we don't like the way you look. I don't know. So can you just sort of address that that concern?
Yes, Senator. I can assure you it has nothing to do with the looks of the applicant. Yeah, I know. But you're quite right. That particular issue is outside the country's control because it's determined on an individual basis based on the individual circumstances of each and every applicant that comes in. And the visa waiver requirement is very tough. It's a 3% or less refusal rate.
At one point, it had gone up to 10%, right?
There was a period of time when it rose to 10%.
Can you kind of talk about what happened there and what why we took up 10, dropped that down to 3?
Well, Mark, I think you were in the administration then, but go ahead.
Sure, very, very briefly, and this is opening up perhaps a separate issue, but there was, as part of the 9/11 Act that I referenced earlier, that gave us ESTA and the information sharing agreements and several other security enhancements. There was also a temporary waiver put in place to allow that threshold to go from 3 to 10%, because several, in particular, Eastern and Central European countries, and South Korea, for that matter, historically had a very difficult time getting under 3%, even though they were all trending downward very well. But there was a sunset provision in the legislation that said, as of June 30th, I believe, 2009, if DHS hadn't implemented a biometric air exit system at all our airports in the country, then the window closed and the waiver authority went away. So since 2009, we've been back in the 3% piece.
Before I have my exit question, do you have anything?
I sure do. One of the questions I want you to be thinking about, I'm going to ask George Selim to join us at the table, please. And George is the head of the DHS's Office of Community Partnerships, and I want to ask him a couple of questions. The question I would ask of each of our witnesses here, and for you to think about, this is a pitch well telegraphed, okay? Is let's say you're sitting on this side of the table, and not on that side of the table, and you have the responsibility to craft legislatively changes to the visa waiver program, and the House has taken some steps. We have different pieces of legislation that will be introduced here. And so my question of each of you, just to very briefly say, one or two things, if we're going to legislate, for God's sake, do this, at least do this. Okay, that'd be my question. But, all right, Mr. Selim, we've been spending a lot of time talking about ways to keep people of ill intent out of our country. And we've not talked very much about the efforts that are going on within the Department of Homeland Security to reach out to the Muslim community and to see how we might partner with them to reduce what I think is the greatest threat. It's not the folks that are going to hunker down for 2 years, embed themselves in a refugee camp and try to get into this country that way. That doesn't make a lot of sense. We've worked very hard, as we're hearing here, to make ever more secure and effective visa waiver program. We're going to continue to do that. But what I think we're seeing is the greatest threat to our security, our safety in this country comes not so much from people embedded with terrorists or with refugees or even folks coming through the visa waiver program. The greatest threat is people who live here, maybe people who are born here and becoming radicalized. And there is an effort going on to address that in a couple of ways. And one is within the Department of Homeland Security, you're involved in that. The other is outside of the Department of Homeland Security. I'll just mention what it is. I think it was Tom Friedman who said recently, the folks that are most likely to be radicalized and want to go to Syria or Iraq or other places to be part of this effort with ISIS, he described them this way, and I'm paraphrasing. A lot of them are guys who've never been part of a winning team. A lot of them, they've never held a woman's hand, never had a date, never had a job, and never been part of a winning team. And they see this as an opportunity to be a part of a winning team and to be able to have money, to be able to have stature, to be able to have a job, and to be able to have women, to put it bluntly, and a shortcut to get it. And if they get killed in the meanwhile, they go to heaven. They have all more of that, and their families get money as well. So that is appealing to a number of people. I think part of what we need to do is make sure that ISIS is not seen as a winning team. And the president said again and again and again, defeat, degrade and defeat, degrade and defeat. To the extent that, and right now the effort is on, and finally the Iraqi forces are standing up and being effective. And was it Ramadi? Yeah, in Ramadi. And I finally have some encouragement there. The Kurds have done some good work. We're doing the air part. We're being joined now by the Brits, by the French. 60 nations and all. I think we're starting to get our act together. And I think there's a chance as we continue to compress the amount of land, territory that ISIS has jurisdiction over, frankly, take more of their lives, kill more of them. That's a tough way to say it, but that's what's happening. That's what's going to happen more, taking out their leadership. They'll be seen less as a winning team. We have to be able to convey that change here effectively through social media or other ways, more effectively than we've done. Okay. Why don't you tell us about what you're doing in your office? Tell us just a little bit about it and how your operation works. And
great.
What we can do, if anything, to be supportive of it.
Great. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you also for the supportive legislation. I know you, within the first few weeks of onboarding into my new role, which is the Department of Homeland Security Office for Community Partnerships, which is the new centrally focused effort to consolidate the department's CVE efforts writ large. So thanks for the support from your staff. I met with them within the first 10 days that I was in the office, and have given staff an overview of where I'm going and how I'm getting there, so that's been incredibly helpful. The office was announced by Secretary Johnson on September 28th of this year as an opportunity to consolidate the department's programs and functions and personnel on CVE writ large. Not
everybody knows what CVE is.
Sorry, the U.S. government's efforts to counter violent extremism. In 2011, the administration issued the U.S. government's first national strategy on this issue, titled "Empowering Local Partners to Prevent Violent Extremism in the United States." Various departments and agencies across the federal government have aligned themselves in different ways. In the past several years, the Department of Homeland Security has consolidated, and in the creation of my new office has further consolidated into a very streamlined effort in which all the department's functions are focused out of the office which I've been appointed to lead. This new office has a remit for preventing violent extremism in the homeland and administering programs to do that. We lay out very clearly that this office focus will be run on, Senator Johnson, you mentioned earlier your comment on, from your experience in manufacturing. We're taking a lesson from the private sector in this regard and structuring the function of this office as an outcome or stakeholder focused model where state and local law enforcement across the country, municipal officials, mayors, county council members, civic officials, as well as NGOs and community-based leaders, those are our stakeholders in this office. And the function of this office is to create products and services to service stakeholders across the country that can play a role in preventing or intervening in the radicalization process at some point. Happy to go into further detail. Those are the top lines.
Okay. Yeah, very briefly, I asked you the question. Thank you for what you're doing, and we'll continue to see how we can be more supportive. For each of you, just very briefly, one or two things that if we're going to make some legislative changes in the program, what should we do? Maybe what should we not do? Please, Kellyanne.
Thank you. I honestly think that the collection and analysis of advanced passenger information and passenger name record is the most important thing that countries can do to enhance global security, enhance their awareness of who's coming into their country. I'm really encouraged by the steps that I've seen the EU take, and I hope it goes the full way, and that they take those measures, and that is the number one thing.
That advance notice is made possible by the Visa Waiver Program, correct? I mean, to a certain extent, I mean, those kind of agreements, that cooperative sharing?
Right. We get I keep wanting to say the acronym API, PNR, the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record information, and use it for all the flights that we're vetting against that are coming into the United States. And we would recommend it as one of the enhancements Secretary Johnson announced. And to have that codified in statute would be fantastic because, of course, as you know, that helps when they're trying to get through their legislative challenges for them to be able to point to U.S. statute to move forward. That certainly would be a big lift.
For sure.
I would just look to strengthen and leverage the partnerships we've already built with this program. Like you mentioned, this provides the structured format to exchange this type of information and encourage more of that sharing, which helps us close some of the blind spots we've discussed today.
Mr. Sibrel.
I would just echo that. It's to view this program really as a point of strength. It's a strong baseline for us to improve our collective border security, and so the codifying these enhancements in legislation, as Kelly noted, is actually quite important in our dealings with foreign partners, because they understand that they also have to enact changes in their own systems to include passage of legislation domestically. So this is a very useful way to approach the project, and thank you for it.
Dr. Frey, let's say you're Senator Frey. How would you craft your legislation?
Well, I would agree with my colleagues that I do think the legislation passed yesterday and introduced by this committee strikes the right balance between taking what is already a successful security program and improving it in light of the current threat environment. But in terms of the one thing I would do, and I think I mentioned this to you, Senator, the last time I testified, and it sounds a bit facetious, but I'm actually deadly serious about it. You need to change the name. I mentioned at the very beginning that a lot of the problems with the Visa Waiver Program have to do with misunderstandings, and I think a lot of that, it's a complicated program. We've just spent 2 hours getting into all the details and all the different nuances of it, but fundamentally, Visa Waiver sounds like we're waiving security requirements when we're precisely doing the opposite of that, and I think that contributes to a lot of the misunderstandings we've been having. So
the program that George is here representing actually has done this. From countering violent extremism, you change it to...
So the function of this office is to create partnerships.
Yeah, the name, just tell me the name change, that's all I'm asking.
The name is the Office for Community Partnerships.
And you could call this a secure travel partnership. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that would, anyway. But,
and by the way, from business, you're right, words matter, and the reason we had this was to lay out the reality. I would ask anybody who's evaluating this, what's the alternative? I mean, we're vulnerable. There's no such thing as perfect information. There are going to be gaps. And it's my belief that even though there may be gaps that we're trying to fill here, not going to fill them perfectly, those gaps that exist in just the visa system as well. There's information gaps. So I do believe that the main strength of this are these agreements, that information and intelligence sharing between ourselves and these partner countries, and the fact that we have this codified and the fact that we have this database that we just build on. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's really important. This is something we continue to build on and improve. And I'm coming from a manufacturing background, continuous improvement. So, again, I do have to move this along. So I really do appreciate it. I think this has been very, very helpful. I hope the American people have seen this as helpful as well. And appreciate your support, appreciate your testimony. With that, the record will remain open for 15 days until December 24th at 5 p.m. for the submission of statements and other material for the record. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Coming up on C-SPAN, a Senate hearing on background checks for immigrants and asylum seekers.